I'm really excited to have my friend Alex McNeill here. And Alex, how do we know each other?
I don't remember. I mean, I know that we, you know what I mean? Like, when did we first meet?
I know when we first met, but...
I know that we know each other through a community that was formed to support LGBT people exploring ministry or working towards ministry.
You and I do a lot of work around LGBTQ issues within the church, particularly within the Presbyterian church. And so I think it's probably a good idea if we model some of the stuff that we do and the ways that we lead workshops and stuff. I know that I did a workshop with you literally yesterday.
Yes.
Where we talked about identities and pronouns for introductions.
We did.
So, Alex, what pronouns do you like, and what identities would you like to put in our space today?
So, my name is Alex McNeill, and I use he, him pronouns, masculine pronouns. I identify as a transgender man. I am also white and grew up in the South and now live back in North Carolina after being away for a number of years. And my other identity that's a newer one for me is that I own 3 horses. And so I'm a #queer farmer.
I keep forgetting about you and the horses.
I don't. when I have to go outside and deal with them.
I don't think you have a choice.
Yes. Ashley, what pronouns do you use and what identities do you want to bring into the space?
Well, thank you. So my name is Ashley DeTar Birt. I use feminine pronouns, so she, her, and hers. I am a Black cisgender woman, but specifically an African-American Black cisgender woman. I am very proudly bisexual. I am from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which if you saw our NFL kneeling video, that's very obvious. And one identity that I get to claim a little bit, but not as much as I'd like, is I am sort of a tech person.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot around sound editing and theater sound and lights and things like that. And I really like the idea of incorporating like tech and social media from different perspectives into worship and practice. So that's an identity that's really meaningful to me.
Yeah.
As well. And so we have some identities that kind of intersect, and we have some identities that are not similar.
Right.
And so I know that, like you said, you are an out trans man, and I am a cisgender woman. So that means that the identity that I was assigned when I was born is the identity that I have. And what do you think that like cis allies, particularly like in the church, since that's one of your work contexts, what kind of things do you think that we don't see or don't necessarily get when trying to be welcoming to trans people?
One of the things I try and help people who want to be allies to transgender and non-binary people take on in their work is to move past assuming you know about someone's history or identity when you meet them, which goes into so many different layers of identity. Mm-hmm. But I think in particular around gender, I know that for someone who may have been born and assigned female at birth and has grown up as a girl and is now identifying in a non-binary place, as an example, I think sometimes people meet someone who they assume is a girl, and so they'll just use she and her pronouns for that person all the time. And it can be so painful when you're on a journey around your identity and you want to change your pronouns or use a different name, to have someone make those assumptions and never even question, oh gosh, I don't think I know what pronoun you use, or what name would you like me to use for you? To get curious about people and really be intentional and deliberate about asking folks to name some of their identities and find ways to support them in that naming, which is not to say to demand to know who someone is. I think all this is in context around building relationship and friendship with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like a lot of cisgender people either are like really determined to be detectives and to figure out who someone is or who they think someone is, or they are very, I guess for lack of a better word, like scientific about it. Like, well, I know this and I know the definition of this word and this word has this medical thing and I'm going to be able to have like these conversations and if you fit into this, then you must obviously be that, and they're just not going to ask any questions about it.
Right.
And I know that's one of the things that I've personally had to like unlearn and get over. Because like you were saying, it's better to talk to a person than to like about who they are and about what they want to share versus to talk at them about who you think they are.
Right. Yeah, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to be in relationship with somebody.
Right.
To get to the bottom of the mystery. And I think I think there's a genuine instinct when you have been doing education and work to know more about identities, that when you meet someone who embodies one of those, you want to say, let me tell you what I've learned. And like go
like the
through
kid who wants the star from the teacher.
Yes, you want the star from the teacher, and that's commendable because I totally understand that. At the same time, it can feel like you're looking to me to give you a star, looking to someone to give you the star for doing the work, and not actually wanting to be in a relationship. So it's holding both. Like, yes, we're doing some of the research and work to know more about these different identities, and then when we meet someone, we get to say, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to meet you, tell me about yourself, rather than let me tell you about you.
Right.
Or who I think you are. Life advice.
Very good life advice. So here's a question asking about your experiences.
Okay.
So I know for myself, as a Black person in the LGBTQ community, I often experience some discrimination and some misunderstandings within that community itself from my white counterparts. And I know that that's really, really frustrating, particularly considering it's like, all right, well, like, you guys also know how it feels to be oppressed. Why are you doing this too?
Right.
Have you had any experiences with that from like a trans perspective?
Well, one of my stories is how long it took me to come out as transgender. I started identifying or starting to name some of the discomfort in my own body. I mean, even as early as my first year of college. I mean, actually naming it. And then the message I got when I started even exploring gender more as an openly queer person or someone who identified as a lesbian, the message I got then was, well, if you identify as transgender, you can't be part of this community because it's a women-identified community and men aren't welcome here. And which sort of flattened the experiences of other queer women that I knew, and it flattened who I may have become in a male-identified place, like assumed that I would be X, Y, or Z, like patriarchal, etc. So it took me another 10 years, actually, to really fully identify as transgender, because I didn't want to lose my queer community, and I felt, for me, it was like bending over backwards to like stay in this community, which meant like not bringing one of my senses of self to the surface, which can be such a painful experience. I think the world has shifted a bit in the past 20 years, 15 years since I started exploring this. So I think it's more like queer communities are more open to trans people than they've ever been. At the same time, there's still some microaggressions that come across around the interaction between trans people and people who don't identify as transgender, despite their sexual orientation identities. And I'm not always sure where that's coming from. I think sometimes it comes from a place around insecurity around gender and the ways in which gender has been reinforced in people's lives, around shame and their inability to really think into how they want to be in their bodies. But at the same time, it can be a deeply painful experience for folks.
I could only imagine. Yeah. And I know that, sort of on the other end, I've heard people, it almost feels like an us versus them argument, that if we make space, even not even just within like the queer community itself, but even with like women's groups and things like that, if we make space for trans people, that somehow takes away from the light that's being focused on us.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like, they're like particularly around like the whole Me Too issue.
Right.
I know there were some folks who got upset about like trans people participating in that, but why?
Right.
Like, it does, as a cis woman, my experiences aren't lessened by acknowledging that you have a similar experience, particularly when those experiences are both caused by gender issues.
Mm-hmm. I just don't understand why scarcity thinking is helpful to any movement.
Yeah.
And why scarcity thinking around even access to political platforms or naming of pain even. Where does that come from? And I think it's scarcity thinking is very deeply embedded in a white supremacist culture. And so it's going to come up, obviously, but in those moments where it sort of feels like we're having to make either we do this or it diminishes something, I really try and notice, gosh, this feels like a scarcity place, but also acknowledging at the same time it's important to name specificities of identity and focus on specificities of identity so that particular struggles can be kind of brought to the surface.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's appropriate for a masculine identified trans person to co-opt Me Too. But at the same time, a masculine identified trans person has had experiences of living a female in a female body. And so, and men have experiences of Me Too as well.
Yeah.
So, I think it's that kind of both and, which is where I think the opposite of scarcity thinking is breaking down binary thinking.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like there's a big difference between somebody co-opting a situation and somebody saying, like, I see your situation and I'm going to uplift that situation, and also I have a similar situation, and maybe this is the time to talk about that, and maybe it's not.
Right.
And we can figure out when that time is later.
Yes.
Like, but it doesn't, just because like one group is getting lifted up, it doesn't mean somebody else is being pushed down, and it doesn't mean that we can't make space for those experiences and those stories.
Yeah.
And it's not like people aren't going to listen either.
Right. Yeah. I think it's so important in particular moments of public storytelling and story sharing that there's something really beautiful that can happen around building relationships of commonality. Like, where do we overlap? What about our experiences has been the same? And really paying even more careful attention and listening to the places where those stories are not the same. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's where the real learning and transformation is possible.
Nice. What role do you think the church has in all of that?
I think the church has such a powerful role to play, particularly right now in this political moment where...
I was actually going to ask you about politics next, so please continue.
let me just preempt your question.
There you go.
The church has such a powerful role to play, particularly in this political moment when the real tactic of 45 and those in that administration is to divide people.
Yeah.
Is to pit people against each other. It's been a Republican tactic for a very long time and has been trotted out in different moments where it's like the progressive agenda is about to win, and then here comes divisive language. And it's so easy to fall prey to that because of white supremacy and nationalism and scarcity. But the church has a really interesting thing to model around breaking down binary thinking. Christ's body being both male and both divine. Like, no one is more non-binary than Jesus, in my opinion, in the OG non-binary, one of them.
I had a friend or a student rather, who once talked about bisexuality as being, it's like, no, I'm not half anything. I'm fully straight and fully gay, it's like the divinity and humanity of Jesus. So this is
Yes.
sort of like the gendered version, or the gender fluid version of that.
Well, I think I want to bring in sexuality and bisexuality as well as a place of breaking, in some ways, down a binary place of thought. And as soon as you start tackling those binary places of thinking, people get really afraid and want to shut you out of conversation. But the church that has this stance to be both political and gospel rooted, because the gospel is always political and the Bible is always political,
Yep.
has a place to go beyond the mess of the day, like whatever the shenanigan is on Capitol Hill. Having lived in D.C. for 8 years, I really feel firmly rooted in this, that can speak so far beyond any one policy, and yet specifically against particular policies.
Right.
So, for example, I moved back to North Carolina 2 weeks before HB2, which is the bathroom bill, among other things,
I remember that one.
that limited transgender people's access to restroom facilities that aligned with their gender identity. Now, I was really worried about what is going to happen to our state based on this law, and how are people going to respond. And it became clear very quickly that this was not a law that the majority of North Carolinians supported at all. It was a Republican shenanigan tactic of division. And the places that spoke out most firmly and strongly against were one, churches, and two, the business community.
Interesting combination of
Interesting
things.
combo. Well, I think it is interesting because I think the church in particular has a role beyond politics, where you can change the bathroom facilities in your congregation without having to bend to what the law says. So many churches came to me asking for deeper education on transgender inclusion and how to talk specifically about the support for transgender people that they felt but didn't quite have words for. And it became such an interesting site of resistance and almost queering what was possible, because all of a sudden churches are like changing their policies, changing their bathroom stalls so that they can be more welcoming and inclusive, in the same moment where the state is starting to restrict people's ability to do that. So it's a small example, but I think it shows what the church is capable of around being a place of resistance to the status quo.
First of all, I didn't realize all that. Like, that's amazing. And also, I think that's like a really good example of ways that churches can be inclusive that go beyond just worship. Yes. I think a lot of times when churches think about being inclusive, what they really mean is, we're gonna maybe watch our language.
Maybe.
We're not gonna tell you you're a sin or an abomination.
Right.
And we're gonna smile at you at coffee hour.
Hopefully.
Yeah. I feel like, and not like every church, but I feel like most of the time when people are talking about we're gonna be welcoming, that's what they mean. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important, whether it be around issues of sexuality and sexual orientation, around gender identity, around gender expression, for that matter, around race and ethnicity and national origin and all those things too.
Right.
But to think about the messages that different aspects of your church presents, and the ways that you can use seemingly little things to make a big difference. I think for some people, bathrooms don't seem like a huge deal, but having a non-gendered bathroom,
it's huge.
Is huge for folks who are trans and genderqueer or non-binary, and also huge even for cis people.
Families.
Any family member is able to take a kid to the bathroom. I don't have to wait forever for a women's bathroom or whatever. It opens up welcoming to all sorts of people in a way that isn't just, we're not going to use masculine language in worship, which is a good thing. That's a good thing to think about, but it can go so much more beyond that into the everyday.
Yeah, what I often invite churches to think about as they're either exploring becoming more intentionally welcoming or becoming a more light church where their session votes to affirm the mission of More Light, and be an inclusive place. As churches are considering that, I ask them to think about who else outside of your congregation would know that your church is welcoming. Because a lot of churches will say, oh, we're welcoming. Everybody here feels welcome. It's like, well, everybody here does. But what it takes to be a person who's LGBT, a person from any minority community walking into a congregation that, might be like a different kind of majority community, right? It's terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
It's horrifying. Especially if you're worried that church might be preaching a theology that says you're a sinner and you're going to hell.
Yeah.
Just for existing. So inviting churches to think about how can you make your commitment to welcoming all people visible and explicit. So some churches in particularly rural towns talk about rainbow banners on their church sign, or having booths at Pride, or partnering with local colleges to do some programming together. And bathrooms are such a visible way to say, oh, this church gets it.
It makes it so much easier. And I know anytime I've been church shopping, I'll go on a website and see what the mission statement is. I'll look at the building, the bulletin, or the website and see if there's some kind of rainbow thing. I'll see if there's some organization.
Yeah.
I know Rutgers has a few different things. We have a flag, we have a banner, or inside the church as well. But just if I look and I don't see any of those things, particularly if I'm by myself, I'm not going.
Yeah. And families look for those things too. It's what I keep hearing from different churches who've taken these steps is that the number one community they attract are actually families with kids who they want to raise their kids in a welcoming environment. So it's back to your point around the bathrooms, and I think this is true in disability communities around ramps and access to spaces. Is that what's good for one community? If you're prioritizing the voice of those most impacted by oppression, centering that voice, the recommendations for how to make your space, your policies, your worship, your families more welcoming are going to be beneficial for everybody. I mean, it's that when we get specific, it opens up the doors for people to really feel included beyond what we thought was possible when we just sticked with, we're going to talk about a specific community now.
And what a beautiful thing that is.
What a beautiful thing that is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you. It's been so fun.